Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your daily deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Chris, and joining me as always is Laura.
Thanks, Chris. And I am genuinely fired up about today's story because it hits every single person who has ever wondered whether the bottom rung of the career ladder is quietly being sawed off underneath them.
That is a dramatic way to open, so let's ground it for people. What exactly happened, and why are we talking about it right now rather than 6 months ago?
So, the Financial Times published a big analysis this past Sunday, July 19th, by their senior business writer, Andrew Hill. And it rocketed across tech meme with companion pieces in Fortune and Exponential View that same day.
Okay, but the FT writes about AI and jobs constantly. So what made this particular piece worth stopping everything and building an entire conversation around it today?
The difference is that it stopped talking about layoffs as a headline number and started documenting an actual structural redesign, where firms in law, consulting, and banking are rebuilding what a first-year analyst even is.
Let's put some numbers on the table then, because I always want to know whether we are looking at a real trend or just a few splashy anecdotes stitched together into a scary narrative.
Fair, so here's the anchor statistic. Entry-level job postings in the United States fell roughly 35% from January 2023 to the middle of 2025, according to the labor research firm Revelio Labs.
35% is enormous, but I have to play skeptic here, because we also had rising interest rates and a broad white-collar slowdown in that exact window. How do we know this is actually AI?
That is the right challenge, and the honest answer is that AI is not the only factor, but the pattern is too specific to be just a macro slump, and I will tell you why in a second.
Please do, because correlation is not causation is basically the official motto of every skeptic who has ever looked at a scary employment chart and refused to be impressed by it.
Here's the tell. The tasks AI is absorbing are precisely the ones that defined junior work. Things like document review, contract analysis, research synthesis, financial modeling, and first drafts, which add up to roughly 60 to 70% of a junior's time.
So walk me through the old model for a second, because I think people need to understand why removing that 60 to 70% is so structurally destabilizing rather than just a nice efficiency gain.
The professional services pyramid ran on attrition arithmetic, where firms hired huge entry-level classes knowing fewer than 2 in 100 would make partner because those juniors did high-volume billable work that freed senior people for clients.
So the wide base of the pyramid was not charity, it was load-bearing. And now the economic reason for that base is being knocked out from two directions at the same time.
Exactly. And Harvard economists Sayed Hosseini and Guy Lichtinger gave it a great name in a 2025 working paper, calling it seniority bias technological change, where AI-adopting firms cut entry-level hiring while senior employment keeps right on growing.
That phrase is going to stick with me. So let's make it concrete with a real firm. Because abstractions about pyramids only get you so far before people want to see an actual company doing this.
McKinsey is the vivid example, because their CEO Bob Sternfeld said at CES this past January that the firm now runs about 40,000 human employees alongside 25,000 AI agents, up from just a few thousand agents 18 months earlier.
25,000 agents is a staggering number for a firm that sells human judgment. So what is all that synthetic labor actually doing inside the building day to day?
Those agents saved McKinsey 1.5 million hours of search and synthesis work in 2025 alone. And Sternfels framed it with what he calls 25 squared, meaning client-facing roles up about 25% and non-client roles down about the same.
And that math has to change who they hire, because if the machine does the synthesis, then the thing they are buying from a new graduate can no longer be raw synthesis horsepower.
Precisely. And this is my favorite detail. Since January of this year, McKinsey has been piloting a final round interview where the candidate uses Lilli, their internal AI platform, to work a live case study in the room.
So the interview itself has become a test of working with the machine, which honestly feels like one of those small changes that quietly signals a very large shift in what competence even means.
Right. And crucially, they are not testing AI mastery. They are testing judgment in the presence of AI, watching how you prompt it, whether you challenge its weak answers, and how you turn its output into a client-ready position.
I want to push back gently, though, because isn't that just firms adapting sensibly? Every generation of tools reshaped interviews before, so why should we treat prompting fluency as anything more than the new spreadsheet skill?
It is partly that, and BCG is reportedly building a comparable AI interview for this summer, with Bain said to be planning one too. But the deeper issue is what happens to learning, which we will get to.
Let's not skip law, though, because I keep hearing that legal employment is actually up, which seems to completely contradict this whole story about AI gutting the entry-level ranks of professional services.
You are right, and it is a genuine paradox on the surface. Because legal employment hit a 10-year high of about 1.25 million jobs this past January, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics data.
So how do you reconcile a 10-year employment high with the claim that AI is eating the junior lawyer's job? Those two facts really do seem to be at war with each other.
The reconciliation is redistribution rather than net loss, because AI is reassigning the work, absorbing the document-heavy tasks juniors did while expanding the roles that paralegals, legal operations specialists, and AI-adjacent staff perform.
But there are still real layoffs happening, right? I do not want us to soften this into a comfortable story where nobody actually loses a job and everything just gently rebalances itself.
There are very real cuts, and the headline one is Baker McKenzie, which cut between 600 and 1,000 business services roles this past February. The largest single AI-attributed workforce reduction the legal industry has seen so far.
And I gather those cuts were not the fee-earning lawyers themselves, which tells you something important about where firms think the automatable work actually lives inside their own organizations.
Exactly. The cuts hit research, marketing, knowledge management, secretarial, and design functions. And Clifford Chance trimmed UK business services by 10% late last year, while Irwin Mitchell eliminated all of its litigation assistant positions.
Meanwhile, you mentioned legal operations is booming. So it sounds like the work is not disappearing so much as migrating toward people who manage and audit what the machine produces.
That is the whole shape of it, and legal operations barely existed 5 years ago. But now it is one of the fastest growing roles because someone has to evaluate AI output quality and keep audit trails.
Let's talk about the human side, because behind all these percentages are 22-year-olds making decisions. And I suspect the mood among new graduates is not exactly sunny, given everything we have just described.
The mood is measurably anxious because Monster's 2026 Graduate AI Readiness Report found nearly 90% of this year's class worried AI could replace entry-level roles, way up from 64% just 1 year earlier.
That is a brutal jump in a single year, and I imagine it shows up in the actual unemployment numbers for young graduates, rather than staying safely bottled up as vague generational worry.
It does, because the New York Fed pegs unemployment for college graduates aged 22 to 27 at 5.6%, which is nearly double the rate for all college-educated workers overall.
There was a specific story in the reporting about 2 students that stuck with me, because sometimes one honest quote captures a structural shift better than any chart possibly could.
Yes, Bloomberg Businessweek followed 2 Princeton seniors, and one of them, Ezekiel Akinsanya, said something haunting, that he wants to be integral, and right now, it is just not clear you will be integral as an analyst anymore.
That word integral is doing so much work, because it is not really about the paycheck. It is about whether your contribution actually matters, or whether you are just babysitting a system that does the real thinking.
And PwC shows where that fear comes from, because internal documents obtained by Business Insider revealed a plan to cut entry-level hiring in U.S. audit and assurance by 32 to 39% between 2025 and 2028.
A cut approaching 40% is not a tweak. It is a redesign of the entire intake. So what does PwC expect the smaller class that does get hired to actually be doing?
Their AI assurance leader, Jen Kosar, put it bluntly, saying new hires will do manager-level work within 3 years, that people will walk in the door almost instantly becoming reviewers and supervisors rather than task doers.
I want to get technical for a minute, because everyone keeps saying AI absorbs the work. But I think people deserve to understand the actual mechanism that makes this wave different from the tools we had 3 years ago.
Great question, because the key shift is from assistants to agents, where the old tools needed a human to frame the question and read the results. But agentic systems decompose a task, execute the subparts, and return a finished deliverable.
So Lilli is not just a fancy search box anymore, and it is orchestrating a whole research workflow end to end, which is exactly how you get to that 1.5 million hours saved figure.
Right, and on the legal side, tools like Harvey, Clio, and Lexis plus AI read and categorize documents at a per-document cost that makes first-year associate review economically redundant, much like JP Morgan's Coin did for loan agreements.
But there has to be a catch, because I refuse to believe you can rip out that much human oversight without the machine occasionally driving the whole operation confidently off a cliff.
The catch is real, because AI systems make systematic errors like hallucinated citations, and missed contractual nuance, and the firms winning are the ones using AI for the first draft and humans to validate, not to disappear.
And that brings us to what I think is the scariest part of this entire story, which is the question of who exactly trains the senior people of the future if the junior rung vanishes.
This is where MIT economist Andrew McAfee gets pointed, warning in May that we are losing the apprenticeship ladder, asking how people are supposed to learn the job except by helping someone good at it with the routine stuff.
That reframes everything because the routine grunt work was never only about output, it was secretly the training program. The years where you absorbed judgment by proximity to people who already had it.
Exactly. And McAfee's real worry is not this year's job market, but the partner class of 2034. Because AI agents produce outputs, but they do not model judgment or mentor anyone through a hard call.
So who is actually handling this well? Because I do not want us to leave people thinking every firm is blindly sprinting toward a cliff with their eyes closed and their hands off the wheel.
The best counterexample is IBM, which announced in February that it would triple entry-level hiring in the U.S., with their HR chief, Nicole Lamoureux, arguing that gutting the pipeline is a long-term management problem, not a saving.
I love that framing, that cutting juniors is borrowing against your own future. And I gather other firms are trying to redefine the junior role rather than simply deleting it from the org chart.
Yes, KPMG's global AI workforce lead, Natalie Cleoberry, put it perfectly, saying they want juniors to become managers of agents, while BCG tells candidates that AI transformation and human-in-the-loop roles are now the fastest path into consulting.
So there is a genuinely optimistic version of this story, where the lucky graduate who lands at a redesigned firm actually gets a richer, faster, more interesting career than the old grind ever offered them.
There is, and PwC's COSAR leans into it, saying a first year in 3 years will feel more like the managers of her day, doing judgment work early instead of grinding through thousands of hours of rote review.
But the structural worry sits right next to that optimism. Because even a beautifully redesigned role does not help you if the number of available seats has simply collapsed by a third or more.
That is the unresolved tension exactly, because fewer people entering means fewer people finishing the development pathway, no matter how accelerated it is. And if the deepest cutters also skip the redesign, the pipeline does not compress. It breaks.
So if I'm a graduate listening right now, feeling that 90% anxiety in my chest, what are the concrete signals that separate a firm that is redesigning from one that is just quietly cutting?
Look for explicit AI literacy training and onboarding, a clear description of how you will supervise and validate AI output, promotion tracks based on judgment rather than years served, and evidence senior partners actually redesigned expectations, not just shrank teams.
I think the bigger lesson here reaches way past law and consulting, because these professions are basically the test lab for what happens to knowledge work everywhere. Once agents get good enough to do the grunt tier.
Completely agree, because professional services is the canary, and the choice every industry now faces is whether to treat entry-level automation as a cost saving to bank today or an apprenticeship to consciously rebuild for tomorrow.
And the uncomfortable truth is that the firms making the wrong bet may look brilliant for the next 2 years and then discover a decade later that they have no one left who actually understands the work.
That is the whole ballgame. And my closing thought is that judgment was always the real product. So the winners will be whoever figures out how to keep manufacturing judgment once the machine has taken the raw material.
That is a perfect place to land it, because it turns a scary story about vanishing jobs into a sharper question about how we deliberately grow the humans we will still desperately need. That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.